Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining the session. In today's discussion, we're going to talk about this required software installation, and then we'll talk about introduction to PHP, and we'll show how HTML forms and PHP are intermingled and they interact with each other. So let's start. So before we start, we know that this is our web programming client was server-side course. So I hope and I think most of you have already taken the web programming client-side course, so you have the basic idea about that. Or some of you are actually taking it in parallel, so you have some head start. So as you know, client and server, both of these are actually part of networks. And what a network means, just we'll very briefly give a overview about the network. So a network, by a network, we mean two or more computers connected together for the purpose of communicating and sharing resources. So here is a example of components of a network. So in the networks, there are, as we say, like two or more computers. So you can see this one is a computer, this is another computer, this server is another computer. They are actually connected, and then there are other devices. Say we have routers connected, and we connect to the internet through the router, and you can see these network equipment, suppose switch, and devices, say printers, right? So all these actually create some kind of network, and this whole network, as you can see, is also connected to the internet. Now let's talk about a different kind of network, which which we will specifically discuss in this course. And this is this type of network, which is where the clients are, say, or mobile phones or tablets or personal devices, and or laptops, or there are like desktops. So these are the client devices. And then we have computers like servers, and those are connected to through the internet. Okay, so the clients actually connect to the server through the internet, and this creates something called client server model. So for this particular course, in the client side web programming client side course, we studied how to do web programming on the client side. In this course, we are going to discuss how we are going to program the scripts in the server, right? So, and the client and the servers, they interact. So they create a client server model. So let's see what a client server model is. So a client server can describe a relationship between two computer programs, the client and the server. So what the client does, very briefly, we won't go into very much details. The client requests some type of service, such as a file or database access from the server, whereas the server fulfills the request and transmits the results to the client over a network. Let me show you one example. Okay, so you can see I'm at Google's homepage, and this is some kind of form. And as you can see, I am actually seeing this web page from my browser, and I'm using a laptop right now. So this laptop is a client. You can say this is a client device, and this browser, like here you can see I'm using Chrome browser. So this Chrome browser is a client software. So client software running on my client machine, and through this form, let's search for something. Say search for. Okay, so what happened is I I actually typed this and then clicked on enter. So this request actually went to Google server, and then some processing happened there, and Google actually sent me the results back. And whatever you see here is the results that is sent back from Google server. And if we go to so if we go to the network, you can see how the communication happens. So let's search for another thing. So there was some, say, okay. So as you can see, when I did this search, immediately you see some communication is happening, right? So basically my request is first being sent, and then from Google server, a lot of things are returned. So you can see it returns the results as well as the status code. So there are different status code, like 200 is okay. And then we see other status code like 500, 400, which means different kind of errors or page not found, right? Okay, so this is a very, and how this communication happens is between my machine and Google server, there is internet. So this communication is happening through the internet. Okay, so we showed you one example of how client interacts with server. So this is exactly through a diagram, that exactly the same thing that I just showed you, and this is just a diagram view. So my web client was my laptop, and uh, there I used a client software, which is a web browser. So I made a request to Google server, and the Google server was running, right? Google server is running somewhere. So through the internet, I send the request to Google server by typing the address google.com, and this Google server actually sent me the response back, and the result was displayed on my browser or client software. Okay, so what is a web client? Now, a formal definition. A web client is in the previous example that I showed you, a web client was my laptop. It was connected to the internet, and it ran a web browser. In my case, I ran, say, Google Chrome, and it uses HTTP protocol. So a protocol is some kind of a language that both the parties understand. Uh, and through using this protocol, it requests web pages from the server, and then it receives the web pages and files from the server. So all these things were the capability of the client software or the web browser that I was running, right? Okay. Whereas the web server, that is also continually connected to the internet. In our case, it was Google server. And the server actually runs some web server software. In the client, we saw that we run some web client software, suppose the browser. Whereas in the server, we run web server software. They can be Apache server or Internet Information Server, or there can be different kind of servers. But this is one of the most popular. Apache is one of the most popular web server softwares. And this one also for communication uses HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTPS, which is the secured version of HTTP. This protocol, so that it understands all the requests, because the web client also sends through HTTP protocol, so that the web server, since it uses the same protocol or same language, it can understand the requests that comes from the client. So it receives the request for the web page and responds to the request and transmits the status code, web page, and the associated files. So as you can see, when we actually did this communication, you see that I have sent my request, right? And this is the response that I got. So the response was, there was like response codes 200, 204, different kind of responses, right? And then it not only sent us the HTML file, it also sent us different things, say different files. You see a lot of picture files, PNG, JPEG, right? And different type of files it sent, like script. And okay, so next we are going to talk like what kind of technology we are going to use for PHP for programming the server side. Okay, so for this particular course, we are using PHP as the web server technology, or our scripting language. The reason behind that is the most popular to or PHP and ASP.NET. And here is a survey where you can see the market share of PHP and ASP.NET. And as you can see, in the top like 1,000 websites that has server-side programming languages in it, 60% is actually using PHP, and where 21% is using ASP.NET. Whereas in the top 10,000, 66% is PHP, 18.6% is ASP, ASP.NET. And the others are even with a smaller market share. So PHP is extremely popular, and it's the most like it holds the biggest market share where server-side programming languages are used. That's why we have chosen to learn PHP throughout this course. Okay, so let me show you one example. I think you are familiar with HTML forms if you have taken the client-side course, or even if you are not familiar, you don't need to know all the details. So what you can see is you can see a form here. Even Google's homepage, that's also some kind of form where you can actually fill it up with your query or search word and then click enter, right? Okay, so here is one form. Let's fill it up. And we have to make a comment or something. Sorry, do a rating by using a sliding bar, and comment is good. Okay, and let's take a look at the source code for this. As you can see, there is a form here, and the method is post, right? You can see here, and then there is an action attribute, and the value of the action attribute has this URL, HTTPS, which says like hypertext transfer protocol secured. And this is the first part, webdevbasics.net. This one is the server name, like the server address, the address of the server, web server. And next we have /scripts and then demo.php. What it means is once we submit this form, the request will be sent to this server, webdevbasics.net. And then we are telling through this URL, we are telling that server that you have a folder in your file system named scripts, and inside that there is something, and there is a file named demo.php. So what you have to do is you have to execute this and send us back the result. Okay, let's see what happens. So I'm clicking this. So as soon as I click this, the request will be sent to webdevbasics. So let's see what happens. Let's check the network. Okay, so submitting it. You see, I have, okay. So now you see, once we do this, now we can see the result. So you see the rating was 9, name, email. So every data was actually sent in a packet to webdevbasics.net. And inside there, some PHP script actually ran, and it formatted it like this. And you can see the results that we got back from the server, right? You can see the status code and everything. We got a CSS file, and then we got a PHP file, right? Okay, so how PHP pages are accessed and interpreted. So this is again a client server model. So the client is, say, our laptop or machine, where we are running the client software, which is a browser, right? And then we are sending the request. In the browser, what we are doing is you are actually writing the address of the server here, right? So this is the address of the server. We're writing this address and clicking on enter. So that request is now going to this server, like webdevbasics.net. And there it actually does, like, it looks for the requested page or source, right? And then it sends the response back to the client, and then I see the result here. Now let's go a little bit deep into it. Like when something like this is involved, say some instead of just asking for a HTML file, I am in the URL, I am mentioning a PHP file. What does it mean? So first of all, it means that web dev basics, this one, this is the server, right? And then we are telling it that inside it you have a folder called scripts, and inside that you have something called demo.php, and then you have to do something that there you have to execute that. So let's look at another diagram to understand this, how this is returned. So first of all, webdevbasics.net, this is the server, and through the client browser we are actually sending this to sending this request to the web server, right? So this is the web server, and in the web server you see that we are running, say, a server software, say Apache web server. So this is Apache web server running in the web server, and then what it does is it looks for a folder, say scripts, right? So this is the scripts folder in the Apache in the server, and inside that, say we have this demo.php. This is the file, right? So okay, so it found the file. It found the file. Next, what it does is it has the capability to parse this PHP file or execute this file. So there is something called the Apache PHP module. So it gets the file here, right? It sends the file to the Apache PHP module. And now this is capable of executing the PHP script that you got, right? So whatever PHP script it got, for this, it may need to contact the database depending on what the PHP functions are doing. So in most of the cases, PHP uses MySQL database. In this course, we are also going to learn MySQL database because that's also, again, the most popular database used for web programming. So whatever it does all the communication and interaction with the SQL database, and then afterwards, it executes whatever is in the PHP file, whatever was in demo PHP, it executes that, and then it returns the information back to the Apache web server. And next, what it does is it converts the results into an HTML page and returns it back to the web client. So if we say this is step one, requesting it to the web server, and then the step two is, say, sending it or looking for it, and then step three is getting the PHP file. Step four is sending it to the Apache PHP module to execute it. Step five is like execution. For that, we may need to do some interaction with the MySQL database. Step six is sending the results back to the Apache web server. Step seven is sending the results or formatting the results in, say, HTML file. And step eight is sending the results back to the web browser or client. Okay, so that's end to end what happens, how PHP pages are accessed and interpreted, right? So I had showed you one practical example where I actually filled up a form and sent it to a server, and some PHP code was executed and the result came back to the and was displayed on the web browser, right? Okay, so one question by now you may have is, when I actually type something like this, say webbasics.net, and when I actually put this thing here, and I put this address here and then send the request to the server, how does it get to the exact server, right server? So there is something called domain name system. So basically the client and the server throughout the network whether it's a local network or it's internet, they actually find each other through IP address, not exactly through these text-based addresses. Okay, so how does these text-based addresses convert into IP addresses? So there is where the domain name system comes into the picture. So the domain name system associates the domain names against the IP addresses. So here is one example. So on the browser, what we do is we just write this address, right? Okay. So we send this address to the DNS server. Usually the DNS server is actually hosted in the ISP. So if you're using, say, Comcast or AT&T or T-Mobile as your ISP, it's the DNS server actually is hosted there. So it goes there. This request first goes there, and there in the DNS server, against each address, it has tables. So for the example, so example.com, it has this address 12.45. Like whatever 56, right? It has this address. So it has tables like this. So again, is this address, it sends the IP address back, like which is the IP address associated with this example.com. So next, what happens is the client browser now uses this IP address to communicate or find the web server, right? So there is actually, instead of just this request, these example.com directly coming to web server, first we send it to the DNS server. DNS server sends the IP address back to the browser, and then the browser uses that IP address to communicate with the web server. So this is the real address of the web server. Okay, so far we have talked about the basics of client-server model. We have talked about what technology you are going to use, PHP, and we have showed one example where the browser actually contacts the server asking you to execute a PHP file, and it sends some form data, and the PHP script gets executed in the server, and it returns back the result, right? So this was a particular thing where we, using the browser software, we just submitted this result and sent this result to this web server to asking it to execute this PHP file, and the PHP file was executed in the server, and the result got back to the client browser.